What's that? I don't know. He's kind of stuck behind a post, I think. Well, hopefully he'll get more comfortable.
So it's the same. We had the couple days before we got here.
Yeah, there is chicken wire behind it. I think everyone should tell their own story about their raccoon. I think that says something about you, Christian, about what might be going on. Because it's a cute fuzzy animal. Oh, I disagree. This is a good animal. So I think we should get started. Yeah, we're at about 10 past. Welcome. This is the OpenPGP working group meeting at the IETF94. If you're not here for OpenPGP, you're in the wrong room.
But you're welcome to stay.
Yeah. We're your chairs. It's DKG and Christopher Wilgenstolp. So if you haven't already seen the note well, this is the note well. We're well into the conference. You should have seen this multiple times. It's also true here. Brief agenda. Want to make sure if anybody has anything else that they want to modify, we can do the agenda batching first. Want to discuss plans for the drafting of 4880 bis. There was an attack announced last month on the integrity protected packet. Have a brief discussion of that. Talk about algorithm deprecations, the fingerprint issue, which we kicked around quite a bit, and I think we need to try to come to some sort of conclusions on. The symmetric encryption upgrade, which Brian will talk about. Brian also, I think, will talk about metadata questions, about how much metadata we are leaking, string to key conversions, and policies about the different registries that are involved. So we've got an hour and a half. Might be a bit of a sprint to get through it all. So we'll try to keep it moving. Anybody have anything else they want on the agenda? I see no takers. I see nothing in the XMPP. All right, great. So 4880 bis. We have a volunteer who's up for. Actually, can the folks who are on XMPP, are they also listening in live? If you are and you're on XMPP, say yes, I can hear you. Let's see whether they say that. Okay, we got at least one person saying yes. Cool. So some folks are hearing us on IRC2. That's good. So we have a volunteer to draft a first stab at the 4880 bis, which is Werner Koch, who's the lead developer for GNU-PG, well situated to understand the problems of the protocol. Werner and I are talking about how we're going to do how to do these revisions that will probably involve Git and Markdown and patches. Chris, do you want to talk at all about?
So yeah, at this point, first of all, quick question: everyone here who would be contributing to the document, and I hope it's a lot of people here, comfortable with Markdown and Git, the workflow? Anyone not comfortable with it? Okay, if you have questions, come and talk to us after, myself or DKG, and there's also supposed to be some wikis coming out fairly soon about this kind of workflow for IDs. Right now we are debating whether the patches only get distributed via Git, via email, or if we also use something like GitLab or something. But anybody who has any feelings on that one way or another, feel free to speak up either here or on the email list. GitLab is right now the thinking rather than GitHub if we were to do that.
And so it's going to be a question of I think what Werner is comfortable with and what other people who are submitting patches are comfortable with. And if those things don't all align, I'm happy to try to figure out some ways to bridge them.
it's really up to the room as to if we just do this with patches via email or if we try and use some tooling around something like GitLab. I think that's enough on that. So I guess actually quick show of hands. How many people would prefer an email path to distributing patches? Raise your hands if you want to distribute patches via email. A few. How many people would prefer to distribute and one raised on? Okay. How many people would be interested in using GitLab, which you haven't used it? It's a little bit like GitHub, except it's open source and friendlier. Anyone in favor of using GitLab and workflows? Okay. So it's about 50-50. So we'll take that to the list and get comments, and if necessary, set up a repo.
And these are not mutually exclusive options either, right? If people are comfortable with both workflows, then I'm sure we can figure out ways to bridge them. So.
Hi, Stephen, just a question on the BIS document. Have you considered timing? I know maybe the answer is not yet.
The answer is definitely not yet. We will have, there will be a 0.0 and a 0.1 probably showing the initial set of changes that modify, that take into account the existing errata and merging in the ECC. Probably within a week, we can get those posted. But in terms of the timeline for when the complete draft is done, we don't have a timeline for that.
Right. So I think it might be useful to talk a little about that, particularly if people are implementing and releasing. So that they at least maybe ask people, are they, because you don't necessarily want people releasing stuff ahead. Or it would be nice to kind of have some kind of coordination between when this document hopes to be finished versus when people will have code. Maybe they're releasing very frequently. Maybe they're not. I don't know.
I mean, early on when we charted this group, we talked about trying to make this a fairly short process, and getting the document done in a year and a half. We're lingering a bit here. So I guess one thing I was contemplating, and it's up to the group, if we get this into Git fairly quickly, and actually have people start contributing what they think is important into that document live rather than going through fairly long cycles, turning this into more of an iterative approach. But it'd be really nice, I think, if we could still try and adhere to that, a year or say, a year from when we started or a year from now, whatever we say. But I'd like this to complete fairly quickly, unless people think that there's much more work here to be done than what we originally scoped for.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not trying to rush you. I mean, I'm just trying to say maybe it would be really nice if whenever the RFC issues that the code people are releasing actually matches that.
Yes.
And sometimes it's easy to kind of overtake or lag. So maybe people do a whole bunch of stuff and make an internet draft and release the code, and then nobody ever finishes the RFC, that kind of thing. So
yeah. So is what's the sense of the room here? Do we want to try and make a sprint and get this thing done and wrapped up by this time next year? People think that's unachievable, or do people think that's achievable? Sort of no indication. Okay. All right. Oh, okay.
Nils Derner says the authenticated crypto competition is scheduled to conclude in 2 years. Caesar.
Yeah. So I think that we need to get this draft done before Caesar completes, and that may mean that when Caesar completes, we end up, if we're still chartered as a working group, we can add an algorithm to it, but we know that there are existing better mechanisms than what was currently at OpenPGP that are long overdue, and so I'm not sure that I'm sure that we don't want to have to wait on Caesar in order to get this completed.
Brian Ford, I totally agree, and I think a year from now would be a good target to have something actually working.
Of course, that means that people will actually contribute and write and review in due order, correct? If we're going to do this in a year, we're seeing people nodding. So the people nodding are stepping up and they're going to, okay, all right.
Stephen, does that address your questions?
Yeah. I mean, I guess mostly, I mean, I think just if whatever schedule is going to be aimed for works well for people implementing, I think that's what I'd be most concerned with.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the integrity protection attack that was posted last month. Who here has read the attack or understands the attack? Can we see it? Either or. Either has read it or feels that they understand it without reading it, or both. Okay, so it looks like that wasn't the whole room. Just a quick rundown. OpenPGP has a traditional integrity, encryption mechanism that basically says that uses ciphers without any sort of integrity checks. And there was a kludge at the end of the last revision of OpenPGP for RFC 4880, or maybe it was 2440 where it was headed, but they realized, wait a second, if we don't integrity protect this, somebody can go and fiddle with the ciphertext and it'll change the plain text in the same way, right? You flip bit 7 and it flips bit 7. And so they added there was an integrity protection added that's called the MDC, modification detection code. And that basically is just a checksum over the clear text. So the idea would be you decrypt the whole thing and then you look at the checksum and you see whether that matches, and if it does, it's good. So that was a gross hack or a band-aid. We know cryptographically, we know how to handle that better today. But it's still better than nothing. But it turns out that you can take one of these integrity protected packets and you can strip off the checksum, and you can convert the header of the packet to claim that it's not integrity protected, and it looks just like a non-integrity protected packet. And so even if someone uses this integrity protection, then it doesn't handle, like any adversary who has access to it can just convert it to one that doesn't have integrity protection. So I think the only way to really resolve that is to say that implementations must not use the non-integrity protected packets. But what does must not use mean? Clearly must not generate. So what do you do if you encounter one of these non-integrity protected encrypted packets? What do we tell the spec? What do we tell the implementers? What do you do? And this is more of an issue because we are dealing with stored formats than with online formats, right? You might have something that's been sitting on disk for 25 years before the invention of the integrity protection, or 20 years. So how does anyone have suggestions for how to deprecate that effectively?
Brian Ford, EPFL. I don't know the answer to that, but for those who know more about PGP historical behavior than I do, are there certain kind of ciphers or certain kind of easily discernible, are there ciphers that have, to our knowledge, never been used by implementations without integrity protection, right? So some of the not so old ciphers that maybe are, that were added after the integrity protection was there, and we believe, no one has ever generated a good file with ciphers X, Y, and Z without an integrity protection packet. And we could say, at least for those ciphers, do not accept, files with those ciphers without integrity protection. Would that make sense? I don't know.
I think that's a great suggestion, and I don't know the history in detail well enough to know. Could you post that to the mailing list?
Sure.
Thanks. Okay. Any other suggestions? I think that's one good possible way forward. So speaking of deprecation, there's a general question about what sort of algorithms do we want to deprecate. And how do we draft the deprecation? Again, stored formats is a trickier question than non-stored, than online exchanges. So, I would just threw a bunch of algorithms up here as things that we could consider deprecating. I put question marks next to the ones that I thought would be likely to be more controversial, and no question marks next to the ones that I think are less controversial. But there's still an open question of what do we tell an implementer? Maybe we can tell, and the answer is different, I think, for symmetric, for signature, asymmetric signatures than it is for. It's different for verifying signatures than it is for decryption, right? I mean, you could say never accept signatures using one of these weak algorithms, and just it doesn't matter that you have a stored signature; you just never accept it in a modern implementation. And certainly we can say never generate these things, but what do you do about the receiving side? So I want to ask two questions, and anybody who has comments on them, please come up. One question is, do you have a concrete proposal for how to deprecate dealing with stored data? How to deprecate algorithms given stored data? And secondly, are there specific algorithms that you feel strongly we should deprecate and get rid of?
I think that for stored data, there's one possibility is to have a cutoff date.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
One possibility, question with Emma. One possibility to deal with stored data is to have a cutoff date. And if the message is originated after some date, then it must comply with the latest and greatest.
Christopher Lillian-Stolpe, my hat off, but this is something I was thinking about over the last couple of days. Maybe by deprecation, we might consider that we deprecate the ability to encrypt with that algorithm, but leave the ability to decrypt with that algorithm, such that stored data you can still get at in your, I know I've got email archives going back longer than I'd care to admit. And there's no way I'm going to go be able to find all the encrypted messages in that. So that's one possibility as well. Just deprecate the encryption capability.
So I think that does still raise the question about what we display to the user about, this was an encrypted message, right? It was an encrypted message using ROT13. You don't want to give the same feedback.
Exactly.
Rich Sauls. Also, I guess, and maybe this is what was said before, decryption after a date. Sorry, decryption if you know that the content is old is one thing, but decryption of content you can tell or surmise is new should also be deprecated, or at least have significant warnings. Right? If someone generates if someone generates purports to give you a set of log files that are encrypted with 512 RSA last week, you probably want to be skeptical.
Yep.
Robin Wilton, I think the hard and fast rule was the one about preventing encryption with a known deprecated algorithm. I think when it comes to decrypting or verifying old signed things, it's far better to inform the user and let them do their own risk assessment than to forbid. It's a much more graceful failure mode.
I think that may, sorry, this is DKG with my hat off. I'm not running back and forth to the mic. I think that may be true for decryption. I'm not so sure that's true for signature verification. I think there's you have a very different cost trade-off there, right? One thing is, did I manage to decrypt this file successfully to turn it into something that I can read? And you can assess that by seeing how readable it is. And maybe we can give them some warning that it may not have been as opaque as they thought it was to an attacker. But for signature verification, to just arbitrarily accept a signature made over MD5 is problematic.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting you arbitrarily accept it. I'm suggesting that you shouldn't stop the signature verification from working, but you should inform the user to say, this was, this was done with something we have deprecated since. If you choose to trust it, you should trust it on that basis, knowing that it could have been compromised. And actually, I don't think it is that different from the decryption argument, because if something was, if you've just gone and unarchived something that was encrypted with something that you now know to be weak or compromised, then the risk is that someone got it out of the archive, decrypted it, did something to it, and then put it back in again. Now, I know you didn't necessarily put it in there thinking that the encryption was going to be an integrity protection, but a lot of people will have thought that.
Yeah, I think there's just a huge nest of usability issues with both of those scenarios, and users already don't understand what we're talking about. So I think we need to be careful about any guidance that we give that says you should inform the user that Fraudnitz Blurgle bottle, which is what they read when they see it. So we need to think clearly about how to do that. But it sounds like, is there anyone in the room who opposes creating new signatures or enciphering using deprecated, using things that we choose to deprecate? That seems like that's a universal consensus. That side at least is easy. And so the hard part then is just what do you do about the consuming side of these mechanisms? So if people have ideas for what to do with consuming sides, I hope they'll post them to the list. And I want to turn the question to the question of which of these things can we actually strike with a deprecation hammer. I'll ask for sort of a sense of the room, I guess. We can walk through the algorithms one by one.
So Stephen Farrell with no hats on or anything. But, I mean, the other thing you might try and see is, well, I would like you to deprecate as much as possible, and maybe, I don't know if people would agree with that though. Like maximally, get rid of as much of the older stuff as you possibly think you can get away with.
With no hats on, I'm happy with that as well. Like the fewer weak things and old things we encourage, but I'd be happy to hear other.
Channeling from the mic and from the room, we've got a comment from Nils saying that RIPE MD should be deprecated as well.
So I mean, but following up, I mean, if there was consensus on getting rid of as much as possible, then the argument would turn around to not what to get rid of, but what to keep. So people would be, the onus would be on people to say, I need this because, not I might need this because.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to approach things, particularly if, I mean, I wonder what that would do to signature verification, for example. Right, if we're talking about verification producing warnings or failing on the basis of stored signatures that have, say we deprecate SHA-224, right? I don't actually believe that SHA-224 is currently broken, that anyone can forge signatures across it. I'm happy to say you should never generate a signature with SHA-224. There's no skin off my back there at all, but I'm not sure how you approach that from the signature verification side.
Sure. Well, I guess if there was consensus on this approach that the default is to get rid of them, and if nobody turns up and says I'm using this and I have old signatures, because presumably if it's a signature that's just freshly created, it shouldn't be like that anyway, right? Then that argument would say get rid of 224.
To the mic, because there's other people listening.
Yeah, sometimes. So go ahead.
But everybody has an old signatures because their email archives are there. I have them for ages, and they are using whatever. And I would actually want to be able to check out that the signature is still valid at some point. That there is. Oh, of course, there's a problem that finding the public key at some point. 10 years after is actually also going to be difficult because the 262 that was used to generate the signature might not be compatible with anything else anymore.
Right, and the public key might be 512 bits.
Yeah. Accessing your old archive is not a problem because you can crack those keys anyhow, right?
Nice.
But
they can't change it in my email archive.
So my personal preference is to not have an email archive, because you never know who might read it. But it's specifically, I think that this is the same question that we had before, and we may want to have a study about what to do with old documents. And there is a specific point, which is what to do with old stuff, with new, and there might be recommendation like basically curate and re-encrypt with the new value or whatever. And that's a problem per se. And then there's a problem with what to do with your new software. In your new software, you may want to not have the option, but even not have it for various reasons. I mean, attack surface, whatever. So I think we have to separate those two problems. We have to have the running latest code, and we have maybe to have something that is specifically used when we're accessing archives.
So from Jabber, Nils says, there are government regulations that specify algorithm expiration like RIPE-MD is suitable for signature verification until the end of 2015. Therefore, rejecting consumption of outdated algos might make sense.
Again, I think we should say, you know, you must not generate any of those. That's I think it's clear. We would say must not generate any of those old stuff. And I actually would be okay to say that, okay, you shouldn't, you know, verify them without certain, you know, things. You could actually say that, okay, if you want to verify these old ones, it would be actually, or process them or decrypt them, because I might have an encrypted email from, you know, 97 that would actually be useful to read some point. And I would actually like to have a feature. And I'm not going to be able to, you know, find them in my email archives and you know, re-encrypt all of those now. When I happen to need it, I might want to do that. But of course, it would be actually be very unlikely that somebody actually would hack into my machine and modify my email archive to modify that email. It is possible, and if they could fake the signatures and, you know, encryption, they can do that. But I don't keep it very likely. So it could be something that you have to give, you know, some command line option, use the old format. If you try to say, oh, sorry, this is old format, enforce old or use the old format before you can actually, you know, do anything with that. So you have to do some user action, something like that. And so it's actually clear that you actually want to process. So any automatic system won't process any of those, but you know, you can still do that. And that's something that I think it's actually very important to keep the old email archives and all that kind of things so that you can still process. It would be really annoying to lose, you know, all of your old, you know, encrypted emails because new versions can't process them anymore.
So from Jabber, Werner says, there are many other restrictions in the regulations that Nils was talking about. That's not a matter of an open standard.
So Stephen Farrell, so just, I mean, I agree with Tara, there's old stuff that you have to deal with. There's probably in the combinations of all the algorithms that are well defined now, there's probably old stuff that you don't have to deal with. So I think if you set the bar and say, you know, that, assuming the working group liked it, I mean, you say that by default they're all gone, unless somebody has a specific reason why that one is needed. Because, you know, and then I say to people, well, show me that you have one, or you know, tell me how many you have or something. And if for example, SHA-224 was never really used for this, I don't know, then it could just go.
I'm not
but you could, I mean, that's part of the work, right?
I mean, most of the people who are interested in this or who would be actually using those, they are not here. And they are not going through their email archives to see if they have an old, you know, if somebody has ever sent an email using SHA-224, because they have never used that. But somebody might have sent an email to them that is using that. And they don't, most of the people actually don't know. I have no idea what signature algorithms or hash algorithms people have used to send them the emails to me.
Brian Ford. So I don't think we're going to find an ideal answer to this question. Personally, I'm kind of in favor of just, you know, warn the user on the, you know, decryption or verification side, you know, maybe a louder warning for more, you know, for more known weak schemes. But in the longer term, I think, we can try. So I wanted to ask, have any OpenPGP do any OpenPGP implementations come with a search and upgrade tool, either, kind of for hard drives, search your hard drive for old things and re-encrypt to re-sign, with this new key, stuff like that. Or even, go through my email archive and, search and upgrade, OpenPGP. It seems like, well, it wouldn't be totally trivial. It would be something really nice to have. We could try to, encourage implementers to provide something like that, suggest whatever. We can't guarantee it'll happen, but, I mean, I don't think this is a problem we can solve by specifying one thing or another on, just the behavior of a decryptor on a single, when a decryptor encounters an old OpenPGP file, there's just going to be no, answer that's going to solve all problems.
I just wanted to observe that for signature verification in particular, this is DKG, no hats. For signature verification in particular, all signatures have a date stamp in them. So we could, in the new spec, say any signature generated after time t with any of these algorithms should be considered invalid.
Rich Sauls, so I had a question, Stephen, you weren't suggesting defining or redefining the deprecated behavior. You were just saying make the default set of things deprecated be everything until somebody shows there's a need to generate these things currently in the deprecated set. Yeah. Okay.
So we've talked quite a bit, or at some length here anyway, about we need to warn the users when they use something that is potentially risky. And some points have been made as well. The users are already confused about crypto. I also don't think that necessarily there is something in a protocol spec that says this is how you go about warning a user. One of the things we've talked about is having an appendix to 4880 BIS that's sort of a helpful guidance to implementers. It's not part of the spec per se, but it might be that when we start thinking about, do we think that the user should be warned? To me, that's almost sort of a note to the implementers thing rather than something in the protocol. And how do people feel about taking that approach if we as a working group feel that there are things that maybe aren't protocol spec, but should be considered by someone who's implementing the protocol.
Stephen Farrell. So, I mean, I think that's a sensible suggestion. I just looked at 4880 and it does have things like must warn.
Okay.
Derek, I was just about to say the same thing, that we have lots of, RFCs that say that must do this, must audit these events, must, complain about this. And we have also implemented, guidance to say that, okay, this thing must be configurable. That, for example, IPsec, we have lots of cases, okay, you must be able to do that by configuration, which most of the people, implementers actually don't do, but.
Robin Wilson, there's a slight element of social engineering here, and I don't say that in a bad way, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't use the specification process to set out what we would like the behaviors to be. Okay. And then some of these decisions can actually, for example, Dan's point about is anyone using this, or are the people who are using this or dependent on it in the room with us? Maybe not, but actually there's an extent to which you can defer that question to the implementation and deployment point, because it will be in vendors' interest to implement or not implement, depending on what they know of their customers or potential customers.
Okay.
All right, so I think we'll move on to the next. So this has a potential to be a huge rabbit hole. Sorry.
Before we go, let's actually take, so again, we're going to do a hum. Should we start with what we should deprecate, or should the discussion be what we should keep? I.e., should we start off with wiping the slate clean and adding things back in, hum, if we think that's the right approach? if we should go through and strike the hammer on things that we think are bad. Is that the approach we should take, Hum? Okay, we have no algorithms in 4880 BIS until we start adding them in.
Linus Geisler, also from EPFL. What about the proposition of letting the algorithms, but just putting error messages or warning, or coding them out completely? I didn't see that choice in your questions. Am I correct?
Sorry, I think that the room, people have already raised issues in the room that they still need access to their old mail archives. So I don't think I don't think anyone here is realistically proposing that new tools should not be able to, say, decrypt an old message that's...
Okay, so we were just talking about warning messages here. Or
we're talking about
messages.
There's going to be a cut, right? There's going to be a cut of things that you must not generate and must warn if you process. Or, and maybe there's two cuts. That's must not generate and must not process, and then there's maybe must not generate and must warn if you process, and then there's you can use. But I don't think anyone's saying that, like, oh, you've got something that's encrypted with Cas5, we're not going to decrypt it for you.
Okay. But the question is just, do we want to keep OpenPGP as a encryption decryption library that you can use even for weak ciphers, but it will just say warning, MD5 deprecated, don't use? Or will we be using other libraries for doing some research on old stuff? That was also a bit a question. So if you really kick out definitely MD5, so we say we don't create any MD5 anymore, we just check whether it's an MD5 because we want to be able to verify our old messages.
So there are already OpenPGP implementations that reject signatures that claim to be made with MD5, regardless of whether they validate.
Okay.
So I don't think that those signatures, I mean, and that's because the spec says that MD5 is deprecated.
Okay.
So, they'll return a does not validate with an error message that says this did actually validate, but in fact it only validated using a weak digest. Okay. Right. So the answer is this is not a signature you should rely on.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing to keep in mind is this won't magically make the old software vaporize on your machines, right? This is the standard going forward. If you really, if things really do go away, there is still the current versions of PGP that would continue to do that, right?
So, sorry. So I want to move on to the fingerprint question. I have sort of a series of questions that are up here. We've added a lot of stuff back and forth on the list without coming to any conclusion, which is a little dismaying. So I'm going to read through the list of questions that I have up here and see if people have a specific choice. So one of the questions that came up was whether we want to have one fingerprint format going forward or whether we want to have a flexible set of possible fingerprint formats going forward.
Brian Ford, I feel strongly that we should require one and only one fingerprint format per key per key scheme to avoid massive confusion, but I'm totally happy with different fingerprint formats for different key schemes if that seems useful.
Something from the Jabber room. Warner has a 1 with an exclamation point after it. So
should we do a hum on that and just settle the matter in the room? Do we want?
Well, we can't settle it in the room. We still have to take it to the list.
Yes, but when I say settle it in the room, I mean get the sense of the room. Mm-hmm. So the two hums are going to be one format versus multiple formats. So hum if you think there should be one format, one for key type.
Rich?
Sorry.
Rich Sauls, I think it's better to phrase it as one format, one per key type, or an open, or N formats possible.
Well, maybe I want to ask the question first of should there be more than one format for a given key? Get a sense of the room for that.
Okay.
So should there be more than one fingerprint format for a given key? If you think that we should allow more than one format for a given key, hum now. So if you think that there should be only one format for a given key, hum now. Okay. So thank you all for being reasonable. So I don't know that we need to settle whether we have different formats for different key types at the moment. It seems simplest right now to think about one format with one cryptographic digest for all key types, and if a new key type is defined that needs to be fingerprinted differently, we can do that. But I haven't heard any proposals for something that would split it out that way.
Why don't we just want to ask the question if anyone thinks you want to ask that for.
Brian Ford again. I guess I'm not going to argue that we should, specifically come up with multiple formats. I think I would also be happy with basically just one reasonable one. But I guess where it occurred to me that it might be worth considering is if we want to use a bigger stronger hash function for keys in much higher security parameter format or something like that, like use one hash format to generate for fingerprints for ED448 keys versus a smaller hash for fingerprints for ED25519 keys or something like that. But again, I don't have a strong position either way.
Second that, there is a case to be made that you could include a proof of work in the fingerprint to make it stronger without having the size increase. So there is a possibility that better stuff will come up.
So do you want to describe the proof of work? Because I'm seeing some puzzled looks. I remember the discussion from the list.
Well, suppose that, for example, you require that you compute a hash and a salt. I mean, the hash of the key and the salt, and you choose the salt so that the resulting hash has some particular characteristics, like meets the first 7 letters of your name or starts with some known pattern or whatever. And then there are possibilities to include that, and the advantage there is that you can keep the hash, you can keep the fingerprint small while decreasing the chance that it be forged. I mean, the only thing I want to say is not that there is a specific solution. What I want to say is that there is a case to be made that we can think of something smarter and stronger when the need arises in a couple of years.
Brian Ford, I like that idea intuitively. I feel like it's worth exploring, and I would totally entertain it as long as it preserves the invariant that for a given key there will only be one fingerprint. And I think what you're proposing probably can and preserve that invariant. But I guess I'd like to see kind of the specific design for that, and it might be interesting, but I guess there's a bunch of questions.
So, Christian, is this something that you're considering that you think we might want to include in 4880 bis?
We definitely could. I mean, I don't have a specific design in the mind right now, and there was just the big step between having the sketch and having a design and seeing it's practical.
Yeah.
But what I understand is that we can definitely do better than taking a SHA-256 hash and keeping only so many characters.
So I would like to see proposals for that on the list, because if there is, I mean, if we do have a goal of trying to get something out in a year, I feel like these proposals may take longer than a year to get consensus on from the cryptographic community. So
Manuel Pugore-Gonard, I'm not sure if I understand your proposal correctly, but are you suggesting that we keep the same total length of the hash, and so truncate the part that hashes the key and replace the remaining bytes by a hash of identity? Is that correct?
The idea is in as much as you can qualify your key with an arbitrary part that you can work out to have certain properties, then you can make sure that the hash, say, starts with 32 zeros.
Yeah.
And which you don't put in the signature because you don't need them. But then it's equivalent to having your signature, your fingerprint be 32 bits longer, and increases thus the resistance to various attacks.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think we need to move forward. We've got not a whole lot of time left, and there's several other points that we want to get to. So I'm going to ask people to come back to the mailing list with, if you have any clear thoughts about these questions. I want to highlight specifically, maybe we don't choose the digest here or in the next week on the mailing list. But specifically the things that have come up on the mailing list are, what is going to be digested? Should it include just the key material, or should it include, Christian just mentioned, including possibly part of that, a user identity? We've talked, currently it includes a creation time, which has some potential advantages and some potential drawbacks. People have talked about trying to include the expiration time as well. And I think we need a clear statement about whether we do one or the other. Werner on the mailing list, on the XMPP, says, leave the timestamps out as we did in PGP2. So that would mean that when you certify a key, when you're attaching something to a key, you're not actually signing over the creation time of the key as well. You're just signing over the key material. So the key owner could assert the creation time, and the other people would not be asserting that. And the last question was about V5 versus V4. Do we want to say that if we have new keys that work in this new way, this is all a V5 fingerprint, so that you can't take a single key and convert it from V4 to V5? That is, that the certifications that people make over your key would not be valid if you take the same key material and moved it from a V4 key to a V5 key. An advantage to that is that it's quite clear what the capabilities of a key is, that the key has come out in V5. A disadvantage is that people might want to keep the same raw key material around because they like the certifications that they've accumulated on their key or something like that. Does anyone want to speak strongly in favor of or in opposition to the creation time or V5 versus V4?
Werner made a further comment about times. He basically indicated that implementation started using a timestamp of 0 when we put timestamps in the signature or in the fingerprint.
So I'm going to move on from fingerprints here. We have no other feedback from the room. If you've got specifics, I would love to have someone volunteer to write a proposal for what we should do for fingerprints, even if it's a straw man that you don't feel like you can get fully behind. To have a concrete thing that people can argue against or for would be really useful. Is there anybody who's willing to volunteer to write a proposal for, you just stepped back from the mic, Stephen.
I think I saw him standing at the line.
Stephen, what I was going to say was the choice of digest one. I mean, I know there's a bunch that you could choose, but SHA-256 seems okay, right?
I would agree that SHA-256 seems okay. Does anyone have any opposition to using SHA-256 as the baseline for the fingerprint?
Brian Ford, why not just upgrade to SHA-512? So I would take that as kind of the natural, just go with the stronger, since it's only ever going to be used for showing a very small amount of data, and there's at least a slight security argument that's better if and when we adopt kind of high security keys like ED448 or something like that, and it's not going to make a difference one way or another for other keys.
From the deprecation point of view, if we're starting with nothing and picking one digest, we may also choose to pick SHA-512, in which case it would be reasonable for implementations to just use SHA-512. I'm assuming there would be that we're talking about truncated SHA-512 for the fingerprints, because
yes, truncated.
No human being will.
Well, possibly truncated to something to a length that depends on the strength of the key. I don't know. So maybe the fingerprints of ED448 keys should be somewhat longer than fingerprints of ED25519 keys. I'm not sure, but it seems plausible.
I'll point out that an ED448 key is significantly shorter than a SHA-512 digest anyway.
Okay.
So yeah, I really would love it if someone would volunteer to write. So Werner says too slow on embedded platforms. It's not clear to me what is too slow. 512. Okay. So I think it would be great if someone would propose a concrete thing, but I'm not getting any volunteers yet. I might stalk you later in the meeting and ask you to do it. All right. So Brian, are you up for talking about symmetric crypto?
Sure. And stand in the pink box. Yep.
Okay. My slides.
Sorry. Did you send me slides?
Oh yes.
I must have missed them. Okay. So I'll pull them up now. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So I put up a draft like a few minutes before the internet draft disclosure deadline. So I don't know how many people have read it. But basically just discussing some of the issues.
Brian, your mic is on.
Maybe it's just not high enough. Take it into half. Yeah. Is it working?
It might just not be on.
Maybe it's on now? Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, so clearly we want to modernize the kind of the cipher suite, and especially the way integrity protection is done. Sorry for those of you who read my draft that said identity protection when it should have said integrity protection. That's delirious typing at the last minute effects. But it seemed obvious to me anyway that the best way to do that is basically to migrate the standard toward using authenticated encryption schemes, providing kind of a framework for hopefully supporting multiple authenticated encryption algorithms. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so actually this was a set of possible things to discuss. I also added the topic that DKG brought up, but that could be dealt with whenever. So right now I'm just talking about the first bullet up there. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's things that I assume it's obvious we want to do is to at least deprecate SHA-1 based integrity protection, and deprecate the way the broken, vulnerable way that the modification detection packet is used and exists now. Now there are basically two classes of questions we need to discuss, and we don't necessarily have to discuss. I don't expect to be able to decide that here. We don't even really need to discuss them here necessarily. But first of all, which schemes should we plan to include from the start? Some three options that seemed likely choices to me to at least consider would be AES GCM. It's not the latest, shiniest scheme, but it's, as far as I know, it's not broken and it's popular. And then kind of for maybe something like Cha-Cha Poly 1305 as a very contrastingly alternative, scheme that seems to have considerable popularity and is very fast in software and stuff. And of course, in the future, we definitely want to be looking at the Caesar competition, although I agree that we shouldn't wait for that to be over before we do something. And actually ignore the last thing. It's on your list, so that'll be dealt with. That's an important issue to deal with separately. Okay, next slide. Now, orthogonal to the which scheme or which schemes question, we need to answer a few kind of technical internal data format questions. I don't perceive these to be extremely difficult, but they just need a little attention and review at the very least, and some may need discussion. So one is, do we repurpose the existing packet tags? Tag 18 is the symmetric key protected data, and tag 19 is the integrity check, which are currently separate. In my draft, I propose that we basically deprecate, for these new encrypted schemes, we just not use either of those. Instead, we add a new, possibly tag 20 for an, authenticated, an AEAD protected packet in which the MAC, the authenticity check would just be a fixed length trailer added, within that packet. This assumes that that the MAC is always a fixed length that's kind of known based on the cipher suite that's selected. I believe that that's a safe assumption. Anybody tell me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree with this approach. Then the next issue is a lot of AEAD schemes assume take a nonce as an input. How do we deal with that? What do we do with the nonce? Do we treat it as an IV and kind of always have the sender include an explicit nonce as a kind of as a header to each encrypted chunk? Or do we implicitly define it, for example, by counting chunks from the beginning of the file? So the important property of the nonce in AEAD schemes is usually that it's unique within the context of a given session key. So we had better not, we've got to be absolutely sure that however we design this, we never reuse a nonce with a given session key. But generally, since PGP encryptors create a new session key, this is universally true as far as I know, right? If that's the case, PGP encryptors always create a fresh session key. When they create a file, we can decide how we want the nonces to be generated, either explicitly or implicitly within the file, but we just need to decide that. And then another question, I don't know, these schemes allow for additional data that is identity protected but not encrypted. Does OpenPGP have any use for that, or do we just say that that's always a zero length input in this case? So anyway, just questions for consideration. I just want feedback maybe on the mailing list. Yeah. Okay, and that's all for this section, and you can tell me when we come to the next topic.
Yeah, well, actually, do people have comments or suggestions on these particular points, preferences? I mean, maybe it would be useful to,
or other issues that I forgot to bring up in my draft or up here.
So I'd like to actually ask for a hum on the first bullet point that we have here, which is about whether we should reuse existing packet formats, or whether and just define a new cipher, or whether we should define a new packet format for encrypted using authenticated encryption. So who in the room, so the two questions are going to be, do you think we should reuse existing packet formats, or do you think we should make a new one? So do you think we should reuse existing packet formats?
Right. Stephen Farrell, just questioning the question.
Sorry?
Just to question the question. Maybe there's a third option, well, maybe people might just say, I want the new thing, and not actually know what they're answering.
Okay, what kind of clarification would be useful?
You could just ask, who actually knows the difference.
Okay, yeah. So let me hear a hum of the room. Or do we want to? I mean, asking people to raise their hands to admit ignorance is awkward.
I don't know. I
but-
can do it. I don't know.
Okay.
Sure.
I know that's what I'm saying.
So, I mean, do you want a three-part hum where the third part is I don't know what's going on? I don't know what the.
Or maybe just, I mean, I think most of these things are just whatever implementers choose would be probably okay, right? Is that not true for most of these?
I think there are weird consequences.
Shall I maybe speak briefly to at least my thoughts on kind of what my recommendation was? So I recommended moving to a new packet format precisely because kind of the old system was separated the encryption and integrity protection into two separate packets, and that has gotten us in trouble. So my suggestion was basically about making a clean break from that universe into a single new packet format that's semantically defined to be encryption plus integrity protection. Any tag 20 packet you ever see is going to be authenticated encryption. And, so basically clean break and coupled with, to me anyway, the absence of an obvious downside to that in terms of compatibility, because, any new scheme that we throw in a tag 20 packet is going to be a completely different encryption scheme than anything you ever see in a tag 18 packet anyway. So it doesn't seem like it makes compatibility problems any worse. So those are my thoughts, but yeah.
I don't know anything about the OpenPGP packet format, but I remember that this has been a problem in a couple of other places, like in SSH, where some of these things, some of the crypto libraries wants to do these combined mode ciphers in a way that they get the whole thing in as one blob. And you can't give, this is the encrypted part and this is the tag as a separate thing. So that might actually, I would say that probably having a separate, format where you have the thing in as one blob is actually probably going to be more compatible with crypto libraries that are doing these kind of things.
So I think that addresses the streamable chunkable question, which Brian had up here earlier.
I think that's an orthogonal question, right? Or
Well, no,
I didn't understand.
So if you take asymmetric signatures out of the question, right? So I think the question is, so with AEAD, I either get all the data out or I get none of the data out. And if I've got a 4 GB file, that means my decryption mechanism gives me 0 bytes until it gives me all 4 GB. And so if we put the put signatures aside for the moment, and you just think about, I would like to be able to get some of those bytes out at first, you could do authenticated encryption in pieces within the file format. And so I've actually gotten a bunch of feedback because I asked on the CFRG about this, and there are papers people have written. Rogaway pointed me to some papers that he wrote. There are several other folks who they're calling this OAE, which is online authenticated encryption. And there are explicit constructs, and there's cryptographic analysis about it. I haven't read them all yet, but I think if we're going to be doing AE, I think we would want to be able to do OAE because of the traditional history of streamed decryption.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said, but I do see this as kind of a problem orthogonal from this.
From the packet choices, yes.
Because we can do that by having by breaking up the 4 GB file into a whole series of 1 MB or 64K chunks, each of them a separate, tag 20 chunk with an authenticator in it, with the authenticated encryption bundle in that, right?
Well, but then you get chunk reordering attacks, which...
Yeah. Well, we have to be careful about that. But I'm just saying that's the other discussion, the screening discussion.
That's
right?
actually one of the reasons you might want to put the additional data there. to protect the,
I see.
fragmentation ordering stuff by saying, okay, this is the, the index of the thing that is always added additional data added there, and this is going to be this piece of that.
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's a possible answer to this. So, which is great. So we need to figure out the answer to this in the context of the streaming discussion.
Right, Stephen Farley. So just again, I mean, I think for the first one, for the new one, I mean, having a new packet tag sounds quite reasonable. But I think this is the kind of thing that could just be driven by people doing the code.
We have a +1 from Werner on new packet tag, by the way.
In that case, so I think that swings more weight than any argument that I could make. So I think we should just, I mean, I think for things where there's no security difference, there's no real functional difference, then the people writing the code, let's let them pick.
Okay. Yeah, Nils also says +1. So I don't hear any objections to that. So I think we should just treat that as a decision without a hum, I guess, unless someone raises a strong objection on the mailing list. All our
remotes just got kicked out of the room.
Yeah.
And also from another room as well.
Interesting. Did anybody know who we should contact? I mean, that's too bad because we actually have very useful contributors who are on Jabber right now. Can someone tell me that they're trying to get that resolved, like trying to find? Is that the usual way to do it? I don't know what the process is.
Did you create a ticket? Okay, right. So it also happens in another meeting in parallel. So I think you can be assured the tickets have been filed.
Okay.
Okay, got folks coming back on now. Open it anyway. Only one of them came on.
And that's not one of the ones who was kicked.
Right.
So I don't have other specific questions to ask here. I think that first question, it's good to have that resolved because I think that means that implementers can experiment now. Do we get a new allocation point, or we just tell people that we're going to reserve 20?
What's the registry rule?
I don't remember. I don't have the draft.
Just warning, when I suggested 20, I didn't even necessarily check.
20 is the next one, yeah.
Okay.
These are Ietf Consensus. So I think RFC 7120 deals with early allocations.
Okay.
So when the chairs are happy that this seems like that this is working group consensus, and you have what you think is just a stable enough specification, then we can do the early allocation scheme that RFC 7120 allows, and then that expires after a year or something.
Okay.
But you're not sure the tag numbers here anyway, so you could bring it.
So we'll take that to the list next week. Actually, we'll take I guess, suppose we should do a hum. Should we do this? We've got 2 pluses before they got kicked off out of the room. So hum if we think that this one, that this approach is the consensus is what we should be shooting for. Hum yes. Hum no. We'll take it to the list, but if we don't hear any squawking, we'll make that request next week as a consensus of the working group.
So I can't remember. You need to read RFC, whatever it is, that area allocation.
You said 7120.
I might be wrong, but
we'll find it.
Yeah.
We'll dot I's and cross T's as necessary.
So from the Java room, Werner says chunking would be very nice, but we'd also soon get into the disk encryption realm with all its problems.
So, Werner, can you take can you write a short note to the list describing the specific problems you're concerned about with chunking? That would be a useful contribution. So I don't see any more comments on this right now. So
can I ask one about the previous slide? Previous. Oh, sorry. Yes, that one. So I think you mentioned Caesar already. AES-GCM and Chat Poly, those seem like fairly, maybe those are things that people would already agree on. And the kind of new stuff, meh.
Well, we can't decide on the new stuff yet, but.
Right. So there seems to be two there that maybe the people would agree on. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think that the chunking question is an important one to consider. Like I don't think we should adopt, because of the concern that Tiro raised, right? With AES-GCM, if you do that for a 4 GB packet, then then you get nothing out or you get the entire packet out. And we know we have existing workflows where people pipe a decryption into something. And so AES-GCM doesn't describe a chunking format.
Sure. So is what you're saying that you want to pick those later after you figure out the chunking?
Yeah, I think that we need to address the online authenticated encryption question.
That's just fine.
Oh, sorry. Werner also mentions we talked about OCB in Prague. So I actually mailed some folks about that, and I got a commitment from Ragoway that he would be fine using it within PGP. Ragoway has issued a clearance. The usual complaint about OCB is an IPR complaint. Ragoway has issued a waiver for OCB when it's used in TLS implementations. There's already a free software waiver for OCB. He's willing to issue the same waiver for PGP. So just so the room knows about that.
So yeah, I mean, and I think, so everybody makes up their own mind about IPR stuff. I think it is the case that there's more than one entity that owns IPR that claims to be relevant to OCB, and Ragoway is not the only one. And I think that has been a concern for other folks, and I don't think it's been resolved.
I've contacted other people as well, and I haven't heard back. I haven't gotten a concrete answer back from the other folks that I've contacted.
Yeah, so as far as I know, to date, nobody's kind of adopted it because of those concerns. That's my impression. But everybody needs to think about that themselves, obviously.
Werner says, the problem I see with other schemes is that it won't be faster than the current CFB plus SHA-1.
You mean the problem with the schemes up here or all other schemes, or?
I think it's the schemes that are listed here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was not I was not intending to even suggest this as an exhaustive list. I want to see other people propose, you know, I think schemes X and Y, which aren't listed here, would be better, you know, to either replace these or to augment them. Right. So please send suggestions for specific schemes that you think would be really good to have.
And I will mail the OpenPGP list within the next week with a summary of what I found on online authenticated encryption also. Sorry, Werner says, in the CFRG OpenPGP discussion, there was also ideas brought up about Merkle trees and ED25519. So I don't know if folks have been following that discussion. This is about combining asymmetric signatures with the streamable decryption.
I have a couple slides later in the deck on that if you want me to use them to skip to it and discuss that.
Yeah, so we've got just a little bit of time left. So maybe we should go ahead and move on to the metadata discussion. Is that? Okay, so let's move on to metadata.
So yeah, so back to kind of the high level map. You know, one of the high level questions we need to ask is, what is the feature set we want? What should the goals of the next you know, data format be? And so, you know, this is within the context of that higher level question. What potentially more ambitious changes might we want to make? And so what I'm proposing is, you know, kind of PGP and many encrypted formats have generally been designed along the assumption that it's kind of okay to have some unencrypted metadata that, say, helps the decoder figure out how it's encrypted, what type file format it is, what version it is, you know, stuff like that. This is convenient for the legitimate decryptor, of course, that's undeniable. But it also kind of leaks a lot that can be useful to attackers, and we've seen more and more kind of attacks actually using some of this metadata. So this is just an illustration of kind of all the things that the encryption of the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, you know, tells an attacker who can't otherwise decrypt the contents. So go ahead and next slide. So, you know, just some examples. The magic itself, the first 2 bytes say, announce this is an open PGP file. Tell, you know, anyone who's, you know, any authorities who are snooping over my hard drive, this looks suspicious. Maybe this guy's hiding something, right? This never happens to real people, I know, but, or, you know, of course, it announces what cipher it's using. Well, you know, fortunately, I believe OpenPGP has never used RC4. Is that hopefully true?
I think that's correct.
Okay, but if it had, then, you know, having a flag saying this is RC4 is kind of a crack me flag. Look, you know, invest your resources in trying to crack this OpenPG file instead of that one, and you know exactly what algorithm to apply to it. Where, right? Passphrase, you know, it announces, you know, whether it's passphrase encrypted or not, and you know, maybe if it is, maybe it's worth bringing out the password cracker. Depending, you know, it tells, I think in the default mode, it at least kind of identifies who the recipient, who can decrypt the file, and at least how many can decrypt it. An interesting message was posted to the mailing list that those can be blinded, but blinding them create usability issues. So that's an important relevant comment on current implementations. But the general point is, you know, kind of the metadata reveals a lot of information. Should we try to protect it better? So next slide. So I would like to suggest maybe the slightly radical goal. Can we design the next file format so that it encrypts every single byte, so that nothing is left unencrypted, and to anyone who doesn't have a relevant key, a relevant passphrase or key pair, will only see a uniform random blob, you know, a uniformly random sequence of bits. Of course, you know, the name of the file or other, you know, surrounding metadata could still give it away, but I would, you know, say that's a second order problem that we don't need to attack. But of course, you know, there's going to be some challenges here, so, and some downsides. Obviously, implementing this is going to require the decryptor to work some magic and kind of probe the file using the keys it knows. There are obviously ways we shouldn't do it. It sounds like the current implementation, when it's trying different keys, prints a lot of scary messages, and you know, we want to make sure that those kind of usability issues wouldn't happen. But so I'm just going to throw out the completely unsubstantiated claim that I think these technical challenges can be resolved, and I think I have a bunch of ideas how we can resolve them. I don't expect anyone to believe me just yet, but you know, until I or, you know, other interested people can substantiate that claim. But I just want to ask the question: if this claim can be substantiated at some point reasonably soon, how would this be of interest? Do you think this should be a goal we should work for? Okay, so that's the first half of the metadata thing that maybe I should go.
I just want to point out that we have 10 minutes left, so
okay,
I want to make
yeah,
sure
so let me just go right forward to kind of the other half is the length. Of course, you know, can leak information as well. We can protect that, right? We could, you know, kind of having padding is a very old suggestion. How much do we gain? I'm not sure. There's never been kind of a comprehensive theory, and I'm not going to claim that we can immediately create one. But I think there's things we can do that can improve the situation. So I have a proposal that's partly written up. It's not in a draft form. It's a draft of a draft that I'm happy to share. But basically a scheme that somewhat intelligently adds padding with to produce a fairly low maximum waste, 12% for the absolute worst case, and decreasing with file size. So 6% worst case for files greater than 256 bytes, and 3% worst case for files greater than 64K, I think. So gradually tightening, but achieving a certain, I believe, important kind of asymptotic characteristic of asymptotically reducing the maximum possible leakage from order log L to order log L, where L is the number of bits of the file. So that's kind of the theoretical, why should we consider this? So that's kind of the second half of the, can and should we protect metadata proposal.
Robin Wilton, just a quick thought about the last one, really. I mean, all encryption is an exercise in increasing the work factor for an adversary to read your text. So why would I not like something that increases the work factor for an adversary? So in any world where there is more than one possible encryption algorithm, you increase the work factor for the adversary by not telling them which algorithm you've used. So why would I not like that?
Thank you.
Yeah, so Werner raises a few comments. He says, if we are moving to make everything opaque, we should probably consider moving from plain ECC to Alligator.
Yes.
Alligator is an elliptic curve mode that makes public keys, I believe, indistinguishable from random.
That would be a critical part of. So that's in the design I envision. Yep. That absolutely has to be used, or something in along that those lines. Techniques like that have to be used to achieve this.
Werner says that trial decryptions are annoying if your private keys are passphrase protected. You can't do trial decryptions without forcing the user to unlock their secret key material. So that's another potential concern.
So, yeah.
And then Neil points out that trying keys is a pain if the keys are on a smart card, because smart cards tend to be slow. And then Werner says, and then again, we are sending fully randomized stuff by mail. So
yes,
mail itself has all kinds of metadata problems.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Werner. Those are all very important considerations, very, very good points. So for one thing, actually, one thing I should point out, I'm not necessarily suggesting that we should force users to use the uniform random format all the time. We have to, maybe it should be selectable. Maybe for some uses like smart cards, it's just not practical, yeah. and we have to.
But the encryptor doesn't know what the decryptor's mechanisms are.
Yes, yeah. So well, just thinking out loud. So we need to think about these more issues. Thinking out loud. One could conceivably include metadata in a key pair, saying this key pair is owned by someone who uses who uses a smart card or that kind of thing. So please don't send me anything that requires trial decryption. So that could conceivably be embedded in a public key, and then the encryptor has to decide, am I okay with with living under that constraint? But I mean, these are all really critical questions. I don't think we can certainly analyze or answer them all here. I mainly really want to kind of hear feedback either now or on the mailing list.
If you go back one slide, I think that was the one that had the, what we are called, actually one, go to the slide that had that one. Yeah, so I don't think actually it's worth trying to protect that, saying that this is a PGP encrypted file. I mean, that's quite clearly, visible when you have a completely random file. It's encrypted by somehow.
It's encrypted, yeah. So it's encrypted somehow.
It's encrypted with PGP or something else. that doesn't, really affect anything. Having the information there in the file actually makes very useful in some other cases to have, know that, okay, this is, I should use PGP, not the, some other program to decrypt it for myself when I'm, when the disk crashes and I have lost all the file names. So I don't know, it's just PGP file, it's something else. There is, the algorithms and so on, that's something that's usually doesn't care because there is usually especially if you think about we only have one algorithms in the spec or very few, there's going to be, very small amount of those in use. So, protecting that is also a little bit, not that useful. Protect the number of, recipients and the keys of those would be really useful. And also the length would be useful in some cases, but not always.
We do need to cut this here. We've only got 5 minutes left and we still have a couple of topics.
So if I summarize, I think it's useful to think about moving more and more at the metadata, protecting it. I don't think it's actually worthwhile to try to protect exactly everything.
So just a clarification. So I should have made this more explicit in my proposal. If you go whole hog, like I'm giving the extreme point, if you do go whole hog, what I would envision is we define this.
Guys, can we take this to the list?
Okay, sorry. Sure.
So this is definitely a topic that we need to discuss. So please do take it to the list. So
do you want to lead the streaming thing?
Yeah, I'm going to actually skip over the streaming for now. We'll need to just keep the streaming discussion on the list because we have 5 minutes left. I wanted to bring up the S2K question. So sorry, there's a little raccoon for you guys. Hang in there. So cute. So S2K is a mechanism. This is the mechanism in OpenPGP that we use for key derivation from a password. It's a string to key. The existing mechanisms that we use are sort of roughly equivalent to password-based key derivation, but there is a password hashing competition that just terminated with the selection of a new preferred mechanism, which is called Argon. And we have a patch already submitted by Nils on the mailing list suggesting a new SDK allocation to put in Argon 2i. Argon 2, the 2i and 2d are, so password hashing is similar to key derivation, and the 2i is the variant that is timing channel, that's timing independent. It works again, it avoids timing-based side channels. Whereas 2D allows you potentially some faster approaches, I believe. So Argon 2i would be the thing that does key derivation, and Nils has provided a patch to the 4880 BIS that Werner has been working on. It's on the mailing list. The only issue is Argon is not currently specified by the IETF. I actually asked on list, and Peter Gutmann said he's been meaning to write up Argon for.
Simon Joseph. So Simon Joseph just posted to CFRG saying he's also got an Argon 2 ID.
Great. Okay. So yes, that wasn't there this morning. No. Okay. Great. So this, like the crew of folks who looked at password hashing in this competition are pretty hardcore cryptographers who know what they're doing, and I think it would be a shame for us to not use this. So I'm leaning towards doing the same approach that we just talked about for the new packet ID about early allocation for S2K. For a point from this, this is what like some of the strongest people thinking about this question for the last 2 years have come up with as their preferred mechanism. So I want to encourage people who are interested in this to read the Argon draft that's linked to from password hashing. And to let us know if you think that it's somehow inappropriate for OpenPGP, and if we don't have anybody saying that, then I want to push ahead and try to get this and try to get people to experiment with this. I'm getting a sketchy look from Stephen.
Stephen, probably. Yeah, I mean that sounds totally sensible. I mean, might also be sensible to kind of just not rush into doing it immediately, just in case I don't know some IPR turns up or something, right? I don't know what the rules of the competition were, or if there's people in the sidelines and so on.
Can I get you to look at the rules for the competition and see if you can see any IPR, anything?
Well, no, but when Simon writes a draft, then there'll be the opportunity for people to declare IPR if they chose to do that then.
Okay.
According to the IETF rules.
Okay. So
Yeah, I mean, I just wait.
I mean, there are implementations that came out of that are public domain C implementations written by the authors of the protocol. That
Yeah, but copyright's not the same as patents, right?
Okay, yeah. So our time is up here. I believe I had mentioned that we wanted to cover registry policies, like what are the policies for updating these registries. I don't think we have time to get into this discussion now, but we had talked last time in Prague about making notations easier for people to register within the IETF space. There's an open question about whether how tightly we want to control these other ones. Given that the group suggested that we want to have nothing valid except for the few things that we choose, I'm going to interpret that as meaning that we don't want to open these up for easy registration. So I will think about that, and I'll try to write something up to the list about what to do there. So
on that topic, I also had a discussion with Iana this morning about changing the existing registry if we wanted to have specific ranges of the registry having different allocation procedures, and they said we could do that off of the existing registries. We wouldn't have to go back and redo the registries, so that option is open to us if we want to.
So unless anybody has any other business, we are over time. So thank you for coming, and please do follow up on the list with the several questions that have come up over the course of the last hour and a half. Yeah, go be free. Okay. Joe, can I ask you to follow up with the Argon 2 authors to point them to Simon's draft and just like to connect the authors and Simon and make sure that they know about the IPR stuff? Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems so sensible. Assuming somebody doesn't just turn up the base and says, you develop some code that.
Sorry, I missed the